Welcome to the Cost Show. This is episode 39. And today we have got a special topic, which is a very hot topic all over in Australia as well as all across the world. And when we talk about this topic, which is gender inequality, there are various forms we see, and there's a lot of buzzword about that, be it domestic violence, be it gender pay gap, or even the recent elections that took place. So I think there's a lot of conversation happening across this particular topic, and we have got a special guest from all the way from Sydney to talk about this. And with me, my co-host Ranjit Kaur from UK. Penji, Vaiguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaiguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. Time has changed this morning, so I'm very good. It's 10 a.m.
Oh, that's good. At least you have one more hour earlier.
Yeah.
That's great. How's the lockdown situation in UK?
It's lifted a little bit, but I
Hmm.
just feel, when we got the second injection, and kids are back at school, it's getting better. It's getting there.
Hmm.
We can now see light to the end of the tunnel. So hopefully, fingers crossed for the summer, we can all be out and about. Some
That's right.
sanity time. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So today's topic is gender inequality. Maybe if you can share your thoughts about that before we bring our guest today. What do you
Yeah,
think?
so when you mentioned let's talk about this with our guest, I was thinking,
Mhm.
oh, I better research into this. And when I was
Yeah.
researching, I was like, wow, all these facts. There's so much to learn about this
Mm.
topic that you wouldn't think is visible or still happening today. Not just in
That's
our
right.
community, our South Asian community, but just globally, it's still an issue and it's shocking.
Yes.
So I think the more we raise this, more we learn, the better for our audience, for where we can go to learn more as well. So I'm
That's right.
really glad that we've got Kitu Randhawa, who is the founder and project lead of the Indian Crisis and Support Agency. And well, she can tell us more how she's established. And yeah, let's welcome our guest to this space.
Sure. Hello, welcome Kituji to the Cause Show. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very well, thank you.
That's really great. So maybe we can start with your introduction. If you could tell us something about you, your professional background, and also something about ICSA.
Okay. Well, about me, I'm born in the UK. I was raised in the UK. I've been in Australia for nearly 30 years. Since I've been here, I've worked mostly in professional jobs and for government and private jobs as well. But about 8 years ago, I realized that we've had a lot of issues with people from our own background, South Asian, but Indian subcontinent community particularly. And a lot of the systems in Australia didn't seem to work for them. A lot of that was because more community was now coming as temporary residents. So looking around and seeing what's in the system and what's working and what isn't, it finally came down to the fact that we needed an NGO for ourselves. That even if we don't deliver services, what we need to do is we need to advocate and make sure that we get our voice is heard and people get to know what the problems are, what the issues are, and maybe some of the solutions that we could come up with. The benefit for me was that when I was born in the UK, there was not many Indians and the community grew. So we had our issues and our evolution in the UK. And when I first came to Australia, there was not many Indians and the community grew and evolved in a slightly different way. So I kind of had the balance of both to understand that sometimes governments do throw money at things, but doesn't necessarily work. It's usually not culturally in context. And so that's where I started my journey with ICSA. And these days we do we've done a lot of advocacy. We've had some successes in changing systems and policies. Tomorrow I'm going to give evidence at New South Wales Parliament on coercive control. And then we'll be looking to see how we can develop services even further in the future.
So how did you start with in Sydney? How did you start by going out and about and start talking about this? Was it just at the local Gurdwara, or was it with your friends and family and then a gathering, or how did you get to a professional level to do this?
Well, interesting enough, I started the other way. Most of my time I've worked in government. So I've worked at federal, state, local, and I've worked for private industry, like I said. So I could see how a lot of the government support services that I was working in procurement a lot of the time. and where money was being spent and how it was being spent. So that was my first concern, is that as most of our community come here, and the one thing that we do illegally a lot is work. So here we are paying our taxes, paying for everything, and we're not getting any support. So I started at the end of professional services and started talking to departments, government bodies, as to see how things could be implemented. Then I started in the community, and I really didn't start at any of the faith-based organisations because, one, I didn't want to get bogged down with religious or political issues. I really was interested in people in crisis and how to get them out of there. So then when I started to talking to groups and starting to get to know what the different associations were, whether religious, cultural, or whatever, that's when I really started to understand that how disjointed we were internally and with each other, that there was a lot of competition and tall poppy syndrome. But when it came down to somebody who needed help, there was no active system in there. So I started with small systems, started with a governance, started putting together a good set of policies, and started small. But almost immediately we got quite inundated with issues such as domestic family violence, issues of with temporary residents, particularly students, that were getting into trouble a lot, going into court a lot. So that's where it really sort of kicked off, because the domestic and family violence, as soon as somebody heard there was a ethnic bespoke agency, everyone would send you clients, regardless of whether you're volunteers or whether you have any money, or didn't even care what you were doing. Just help us out because we don't know what we're doing.
Were you alone doing this, or did you have a team behind you?
The organisation was founded by 3 people, and then we had a set of directors, 5 of us, but we were volunteers. Most of the directors didn't do a lot of the actual work, because this was kind of my pet project that I started 3 years before, when I started researching what services are out there for us and what works and what doesn't. But along the way, I can say that we have lots of volunteers in different ways. Even Gurindaji, when I need help and somebody's in Melbourne, I will call her, and people like this are great, and they'll say, okay, what can I do? So because we're all working full time, we do have to do our work out of hours, which is kind of useful because most of our clients can't come to us at the 9 to 5 midday when kids are at school and when they're at work. So it does work in our favour, but it does put quite a lot of stress on you yourself in doing this. And as we've realised that these issues can be quite sensitive and they can be quite precarious. So I'm very wary these days of letting somebody out and doing case management straight away, especially around domestic and family violence, or if there's child protection issues, seniors abuse, those sort of issues. But if it's someone who needs help with writing a document, then, there's volunteers out there. But we're always on the lookout, and happy to have people come and approach us to see what they can do to help. And we do try and use people's existing skills to do what they can for us, rather than say, here's a job, now we've got to teach you how to do it. So if you're a web designer, you can do web design. If you're a graphic designer, you can do graphic design. If you're really good at writing appeals for government departments, that's a job as well.
I can definitely agree, Kitty. This is such a sensitive and need a lot of energy, lot of time, and it's a lot of even refreshing yourself. This is such a sometimes it's very frustrating with the kind of work that we do. So I hear you so many times, taking so much time to do this work. But I'll just get back to the topic today, which is gender inequality. Maybe if you can tell us a bit about, this is a hot topic these days, not only in Australia. And I recently checked the index of Australia on the gender gap as well. And Australia is still standing like 44 out of, I think, 155 countries, which is not great. New Zealand is doing, which is a neighboring country, it's doing much better. It's on the 6th or 7th rank. So we are not even in the top 10. Why do you think, maybe first you can tell us about gender inequality and why this is still an issue in Australia and countries like in the Western world as well. We can talk about countries like India or, other developing countries, but how come this is still an issue in the Western countries?
First of all, I'd like to say that gender inequality is, a lot of people assume that it's, I'm not equal to you. So to a man, I'm not equal, but that's not really where it stands for. Gender inequality is about being given a fair opportunity within your capability. So, for example, at one time I was in defence and I used to have to carry a 45-kilo backpack on my back. So did my counterparts, the men, and they were a lot bigger and stronger than I was. So that's not what gender equality is about. Gender equality is about parity on pay. So we should be paid a fair day's work when we're doing an equivalent job to men. Also, we should be given as much opportunity. So things like childcare, transport, and those sort of things need to be addressed. There's a lot of different ways that you can look at how gender equality takes effect today. And you've mentioned already politics. Politics is a big area. If you look at the demographics, there's not many women in politics compared to men. Still, that is, even though some parties are trying to address that, they're doing it by quotas and other things. But some of the problems that we've seen in Australia that have come out recently is the fact that as women in any kind of senior position, it is much harder. You have to prove yourself harder. You have to work harder. You've got to get better results. And then on top of that, you've got men treating you undermining you or being derogatory, making comments about the way you look, the way you talk, if someone's sexuality, where you're dressed, all those sort of things, making assumptions about that. And that can be quite challenging in itself, particularly when you come from a culture like ours, where sometimes that's just wholly inappropriate to be around people like that. So gender inequality takes effect a lot in many different ways. But the real question that you're asking me is that why are we still seeing this in Western countries? If we look back in history, there was a small amount of women who worked hard, called the suffragettes, to get us the vote. So once the vote was achieved, and that took a lot. When you think about it, in those eras, why wouldn't women be given the vote? And this is around the same time that women started to being able to inherit property. So they were no longer dependent on having to find a husband, and everything they had and their fathers gave them would give given to the husband. And this is where the similarity starts to come in with countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, where women, although now can inherit property, don't necessarily inherit property. It goes to the men. I don't think we've quite got over that hang-up that men inherit property. So men always have their future secured, whereas we women have to work hard, even in getting education. When I was younger, growing up in the UK, so many other women or girls of my age were getting an education to get a better husband. But at the end of the day, we used to talk, used to joke about it, how much more qualified are you going to be to make rotis for your in-laws? And that was just standard of what we expected. So we're a little bit further behind on that yet, because I don't think we've quite got there. Our girls are far more freer to get education and be qualified these days, but the expectations of them are still pretty similar. But when we're looking at overall where we sit as women in the, in the Western world, most of our counterparts have still had those gender biases happening to them. A man will get promoted over you. A man will get the credit for the job that you do. You'll have to work harder because you've got to leave early to pick up the kids, or because you're looking after a parent or someone like that. All of those responsibilities have been on us. But really, the patriarchal system, when you actually analyse it, is not greatly different to something you might find in one of the subcontinent countries. It's just been better hidden because women haven't spoken up. And I think recently what's happened is that with these younger women who have spoken up, some of the older women who have been through it, I mean, I've been through it. I can't tell you how many times I've been harassed at work. But you knew there was only so much you could say, because if you lost your job, that was, you lost a lot. But now with older women who are at the sort of latter end of their careers are being able to speak up, that it's actually empowering the younger women more. And I hope that happens even more, because really what's happened to us has happened and we've got to move on. But what we need to do now is to empower and enable the younger women and call out even the older women who do stand up for the men and go, it's not that bad. We don't need quotas. You've got to be, given a job on merit. Well, a lot of merit gets dismissed with women. And, and nobody wants to worry about quotas then. There's a lot of quite incompetent men in politics at the moment. And I think in the last week, we've had almost one come out every day that's being exposed. So in terms of where we are in, places like the UK, US, Canada, and Australia, I'm afraid it's still the patriarchal system that's in play.
That's so true, and it's a bitter truth, Kitty. I think when we talk about gender inequality, maybe we can say it's two sides of a coin, and women and gender inequality. But do you think this applies to men as well?
It can do. I think when we look at things like people who are disabled or men who are slightly different, or if they're homosexual or anything like that, they don't get it any better. In fact, if anything, they get worse. So we talk a lot in this country at the moment about inclusion and belonging, and how do we make people feel included. But if anything, we actually do a lot more to exclude people. Even our language is about exclusionary. You know, if you're going to, somebody says something and genuinely asks a question and you put them down or laugh at them, that's going to make them not ask again and step back. So it is about all of us taking responsibility about what we do. But within our families, particularly, I still find, you know, little boys don't have to put the dishes in the sink. They don't have to go and put the clothes out on the line. And it's okay if he doesn't clean his room because his sister will do it. We are already, you know, putting that to our children and saying, well, there is a gender imbalance and we're going to perpetuate that. And that's really the struggle, is to talk to other women and say, well, you know, how about you don't do that? How about you don't let him off when he does something wrong? This is the one that we need to crack most. And I'm sure that, you know, anybody who's listening out there knows that mothers absolutely dote on their sons. They can do no wrong. You know, they can flunk college, lose a job, and it's not so bad. But when it happens to a girl, it's like, you know, the shame of the family. So we have to change our own attitudes as women as well, to, if we're going to ever, you know, crack into that gender inequality, because when we're perpetuating the inequality ourselves, then we really, you know, we can't put all of the emphasis on men to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. There was a piece that I read yesterday about lack of political representation. And there were some facts in there about, I'm just going to read out what I had written out from what I'd learned. Of all national parliaments at the beginning of 2019, only 24% of seats were filled by women. As of June 2019, 11 heads of state were women. Despite the progress in the area over the years, women are still underrepresented in government and political process. So this is a massive issue, and there are certain issues that female politicians tend to bring up, like parental leave, childcare, pensions, gender equality laws. And these are often neglected because there's not many women there in the first place. How do we get women to come forward to want to basically fight firstly against a family that normally would say to them, Chopro, like, don't say anything, just stay behind. Why would you want to do this? Why would you want to go to the forefront and argue with men or other people? How do you get women to want to come forward and represent? What suggestions would you have?
I think much of it comes from within, and sometimes it's being confronted with it. We did a program for International Women's Day last year, and we took out a whole sort of set of series of men who have been in the media, like, you know, Jeffrey Epstein and those sort of people, and said, you know what they did and what do you think about them? And they were all like, yeah, this is terrible. This is why, you know, it's so bad for women. But then we also put up photos like Kiran Bedi, you know, I think it was Indira Gandhi, and also one of the actresses. I'm sorry, I don't remember her name. But what we asked them is, say, what do you think what was different about them that made them crack through? And I know one of them you could say family, but another one, it's not necessarily just family. For some of the actresses that have made it, it's not family. For some of the bigger business women, it's not family. So there is something about some women that just say, look, I'm just not going to take this nonsense and I'm going to crack through. But also, I think it's the politics side is very different. I think if we can get more women into corporates and into government areas, that maybe is a better start, because politics is very dirty at any level. It is quite dirty. I've actually stood for local government, and the amount of abuse I got at the polling booth, and it was just because it was like I had the cheek to stand for this position. And I couldn't believe the major parties that just went all out to try and offend you, to find dirt on you, all sorts of things. So I think that's a real challenge. And until we get, you know, better processes in place where women can complain and their complaints are actually heard, that might take a little longer. But we can actually improve by not just allowing. What we can do is to encourage our younger women to take those positions of hierarchy And I feel like many of them are kind of reluctant. They might want it, but they don't want it enough to fight for it. And unfortunately, whether you're a man or a woman, if you want a position higher up, you're going to need to do your work for it. It doesn't come for free. And I've held senior positions in my organisations, and you really it's stiff competition. And as a woman, it's harder. And I'm hoping that as years get on, it's a little bit fairer. But the reality is, this is not going to change overnight. So the next generation of women have still got that battle. But then I look at it from the point of view that those few suffragettes, and they died to get us a vote. It's now our turn to do our bit, and the next generation will do their bit. But also, I think there's something that is changing is that the younger men, many of them, do have more of a fairer approach to women and their sisters than they did years ago.
That's so true. I think when we talk about this position of women in politics, and you already mentioned it's a very dirty game over there. I also think sometime about even the Gurdwara politics and even in the religious era as well. We don't see many faces, women faces, even in the Gurdwara management committees or even other religious management committees as well. So we see the lack of that gender equality gap. It's prevalent in every sector. Every year we're talking about we're celebrating all these big days, International Women, and even though there are some women like who are leading the countries like in New Zealand as well, but still there is a consistent, we see that gender gap is actually prevailing. So now, Kitiji, we've also got a comment. I'll just read through that as well. Binder Dillon. Sorry. So Binda Dillon, she said she agreed with you, and it much comes from within, as you mentioned, and we need to strengthen ourselves within. That's very true. And Avneet Kaubatia, she has also mentioned that if you were born with a weakness to fall, you were also born with a strength to rise. So of course, I think we need to work on our inner strength as well. Probably if you could maybe also talk about the various forms of gender inequality that we see. And we talk about already the family violence situation, how it's happening in our culture and family circumstances. And we know there is a pay gap as well. Is there any other form like outside elections as well that we see in these countries?
Oh, I think there's many other equalities. Every system that you look at, you'll find inequality. For instance, if you want to go to court, it's often harder for a woman to finance it because quite often that's again to do with the pay. She earns less money, so she has less access to legal representation. It can even be in hospitals where a woman, puts her health second. Her own medical needs are put second to her children or her other, other members of her family. So I think in most places you can find some form of gender inequality. And I often find that, and you mentioned the Gurdwara before, I do find this is quite astounding because, my parents always taught us that regardless of the practice and traditions were looking different, but that we were equal. Women and men are equal in our religion. And I've often found that to be quite astounding, that given this equality that we were given, that the inequality that exists in practice. And a lot of that has, I think, to do with the fact that how women treat other women. And this is where you find that, the bits that are not documented. And quite often, again, in Australia, we get treated by, the white lens looking at the brown lens going, this is what I think you need. Well, don't tell us what we need. We can tell you what we need. But when they do that, they don't take into account the challenges that, people have and what we want. Like, not everybody wants to leave their partner and then go and live by themselves. And then they lose track with, people in the family that they're connected with, grandparents, elder generation on both sides. That's a huge ask. So the inequality that's in that is within our families and within our own communities and within other women. One of the things I try to do a lot here, and I've started to say, I've started to tell people that if they say that, what can I do if women are going through this and I can't support them, can't help them? You can look at them, you can smile at them, you can talk to them. But if you notice in some of our groups, you walk in and everyone kind of looks at each other, but they don't go in and say, oh, hi, hello, my name is, or, Sat Sri Akal or whatever. And they just don't approach unless, there's some kind of interaction that forces you to talk. And that is a big thing for somebody who is, alone and struggling by themselves and feeling isolated, especially young women who get newly married and come to Australia and they don't have family here and no friends or connections. That can be a big thing. So we have to look at it from the point of view that it's not just the structures and systems and the political world, but it is right here in our own families and in our backyards and in our events. And when we go to the Gurdwara, it's actually pretty much everywhere that we do it. But these things will not change overnight. Like I said, these things that will have to be worked out. And we have to look at ourselves. That's the hard bit. It's all very easy going, those politicians, those men, those structures. But what are we doing to challenge them? What are we doing to call them out? I mean, 2 weeks ago, we had a March for Justice here in Australia, and many women spoke out. And since that, many women are speaking out, including myself, saying, well, you know what, this stuff happens. It's not acceptable. But we have to do that in our own communities as well and say, look, it's just not on. Dude, if you're smacking your wife, don't do it. And if you are being smacked, speak up. There is a level of responsibility that we have to take on ourselves, because you can't sit back and wait for change to happen to you. You've got to be a part of that change.
Very well said. Thank you for sharing that. I'm just going to read out a comment that Inderpal Singh has stated. I feel astonished that our Guru Nanak has laid a foundation for equality for gender more than 550 years ago, but people couldn't learn from it, and I feel it was followed wholeheartedly. The world would have been so far beautiful. So had we followed that through back then, it would have been a different place today. But it's not such the case. Things are still happening, and even like I was saying, I was reading upon this yesterday. Another thing that's a surprise to me was it stated that women overall receive lower quality medical care than men. I had no idea about this. It was stated that this is linked to gender inequality reasons such as lack of education and job opportunities, which result to more women being in poverty, and they are less likely to be able to afford good health care. So when women, I didn't even think that could ever possibly happen in the West, but it probably does happen, because when women get married, like you said yourself, when they come from India to Australia, you're alone. Where do you go? Who do you turn to? What's your support system? It's very difficult no matter where you are then. And so when do women typically realize that they're in this situation, and when do they come out and say, I need help? Probably because they're in the mental state of mind, and then to get out of that and then say, okay, you know what, I've realized what's happened now, I need help. It must be really difficult on all angles.
It is. It's it's quite despairing at times when we see young women and they've got pretty much, we say that we look for a solution, but there is no option unless someone's got the kindness of their heart to give them a room and, feed them for a while and that sort of thing, which is really tragic. But at the same time, it is this poverty that we talk about that women have to suffer is also about stereotypes. If you look at some jobs, they are stereotypically for women and they are lower paid. So things like childcare centres, in hospitality, these are low paid jobs, and that's where women can often work. And they do that work because it fits in with childcare. But that doesn't mean the quality or the level of work is any less. They should be paid a fair wage, regardless of the kind of work. Some would say that's a lot harder. The other place that they have a lot of work is in disability care or aged care. Again, very hard work. Nurses, hard work. But it's just not appreciated enough because it's been stereotypically a job that for women. And I do feel that, and I do feel that, I just want to comment on Inderpal Singh's comment. I think things were better. I don't think this is a phenomenon in our communities that this is suddenly, it's always been that way. I'm sure there's been some domestic and family violence throughout the years and nobody's denying that. But from my own experiences of growing up in the UK and then having gone to India many times, I find that there is more respect for women when I was young than there is now. The younger generation now almost have, it's the language that they use for a start. They cannot converse without interspersing their sentence with something about a mother or a sister. It's almost by default that their speech is like this. If you're going to speak like that, you're going to have disrespect. This is not 20, 30 years ago. People did not speak Punjabi like this. That is not the common way of speaking it. This is a more modern phenomenon. And from the work that I do and the bit of analysis, we don't have massive statistics, but it'd be good to at some point to look at what's happening in the UK and Canada as well, is that there seems to be an economic evolution here, that it's become a very easy way to just ask for dowry from the girl side. It's easy money. You know, if you're going to send the boy overseas and he's going to study, that's fantastic. But now we're short of money. He's, 10 years behind in where he should be married with kids, and we need to make up that money. And the easiest way to do it is by women. And in doing this, we have, almost lowered the value of women even more to commodity. Parents will still pay a lot of money to send their daughters overseas. And you won't see this as much in the sort of the generations that are born and raised in the West. So we're certainly not getting it in the generation that's been raised here. But the new generations, the new migrants that have come in the last 10 to 15 years, they're not shy of getting married 4 times. They're really not. And that's all money making. And that's what really frustrates, some of the work that frustrates us, is that those women that are here have no options and no rights, but he's a citizen and he can do this with impunity. What it does, it does undermine, one, the values of Sikhism, that equality that was given to us. And also, how are you just throwing your daughters away to say, just as long as she gets an overseas visa, that somehow we can, it justifies any kind of abuse.
Definitely. No, thank you so much for sharing that. I remember when I was growing up, my father sat me down and said to me that you're, when you're going to get your education, you make sure that you, as girls, definitely get an education. And that was more so than the boys, because when you get married and have children, if tomorrow you want to get a job, you don't want to be in Asda or Tesco. You want to be getting back into the career that you were in. You can either get on that ladder and work your way up there with an education, and it'll be much easier when you've got that education to fall back on tomorrow, or you can work up that ladder really slowly, and that meant by working from lower paid jobs and then going higher. So we were always told that when it's the woman that has the children, it's her that has to work 10 times harder. And now that I've had these children, it is so true, because although I've had them, I don't want to just go back to work. And if I was to go back into work, it would have to be full time. And that's not a choice I want to make. I want to be able to be that mum as well. So I think it's a really hard decision to make, to want to go and do a full-time job and then do the support work in the evening, because that's what IT is all about. And especially if you're in senior as well, there's all this to think about. And I don't think we think about it when we're actually in the situation. It's afterwards when people say, why don't you just get a job part-time and work in IT? And it's like, but you don't work as senior as part-time unless you're already working there in the firm. They know who you are, and then they say, yes, we have no choice but to allow you to have what you want. But to go into a role, it's very difficult. So I find that working from home has worked for me, but otherwise, if I was tomorrow to get a job again, it'd have to be full-time if you want to be in senior as opposed to part-time, because the options are very less.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in one way that COVID has helped women in some ways as well, because while many women did lose their jobs more than men did, because it was that retail in your face kind of work. But what we've discovered is that when we can work from home, everyone can, adjust for their children, teach at home, homeschooling, looking after elderly people. All the rest of it can be done, and you can still work from home and have the same sort of output. So that hopefully is going to be something that is a change for the better for all of us moving forward.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, no, that's true. Sorry, there's a blip there. And I think that since we've been working at home and dealing with the children as well, I can definitely say that I think my husband's appreciated a little bit more, because now he can see the work that's been done, and he's seen it from firsthand because he now works from home as well. So for him, it's like, okay, now I see the workload. I see how hard it is. But, I think we're working from home. They now see it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're lucky. You're one of those luckies that your husband appreciate the work that and I'm lucky as well. But I think when we look at the rate of family violence that has grown up during COVID-19, we see a number of, husbands who haven't actually appreciated, and in turn, the family violence have actually grown up. The rate has gone up.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
has. And I think that comes back to the stereotypes of just because the husband is at home. I mean, a lot of women have reported that whilst they would, the husband would go to work, then they would take the kids to school, and then they have their day until the husband comes back. With him being home, it's like, you need to cook me a full breakfast, a full lunch, and a full dinner, and then do everything else. So as you can imagine, when you're in a small 2-bedroom apartment and this is happening every day, that sort of it becomes a bit of a pressure pot. It's just, it has gone up, but also the fact that it was there in the first place means that, I mean, a lot of domestic and family violence, if you like, is about opportunity. That's why we always see a spike in holiday time. So whether it's Easter, Christmas, New Year, any kind of break, you will always see a spike in DV rates. Being locked down in COVID, initially we heard nothing. For about 3 months, it went dead quiet. And then we realized that it was because people couldn't get access to actually go and tell anyone or talk to anyone. And so as the lockdown slowly opened up, the true story came out. And there's been some horrific violence because the opportunity has been there to perpetrate it more. And there wasn't the opportunity to leave because under lockdown, you couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't go to a refuge. You couldn't, even if you called the police, they'd come outside and stay there. So it was a really challenging time for many people. But what it has also done is for those women who might have taken years to think, I can't take this anymore, they started to come forward and going straight to a family lawyer and saying, that's it, enough's enough. So there are pluses and minuses for us, but once we have to get our head around is that as women first, we do need to support each other. So if you have an issue at work, it's not for me to look the other way. It's not for me to say, hey, so what did you do wrong? And that's something's very typical in many communities, is to say, hey, what were you saying and what were you doing that made somebody do this to you? It isn't about what you do. I mean, somebody doesn't burgle your house because they don't like you. They just see an opportunity and they take it. And that's kind of how it works. So there is an element of we just need to be aware of that in bringing gender equality to all of us.
Absolutely agree on that, Kituji. And we know there is a lot of education and awareness campaigns happening, not only in Australia, but across the world as well. And we know one of them is Each for Equal, I think. And you mentioned there was recently a justice rally as well. Maybe could you tell us some of the campaigns that that are running to support women regarding gender equality, and how can they be part of that?
Look, the March for Justice campaign it came about because a young woman was allegedly raped in Parliament House, and it was covered up for a couple of years, or she was encouraged not to report. It became a political issue, not a criminal issue. But she did speak up, and she went public on it. The other thing that we had was that the Australian of the Year this year is a lady by the name of Grace Tame, and she's a survivor of ongoing sexual abuse from when she was young. So she speaks very, very powerfully about what happened to her. But her biggest thing was that as somebody who was the victim, she was not allowed to speak up. The law didn't allow her to. It protected the perpetrator and not her. So those are the two key things that have happened this year. And come along with that, since Brittany Higgins has come out, many other women have come out and said things have happened at Parliament House. And, you might think Parliament House is one employer or one area, but it's our lawmaking building. This is where, if anywhere, it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen in this building. This is the place where, the standard should be set, maintained, and people should feel safe. If you don't feel safe in a building like that, which has got security guards, Australian Federal Police everywhere, and people who are making laws, then where can you feel safe? It's highlighted the fact that for years we've had surveys and research done that women, 1 in 3 women are assaulted in their lifetime. 1 in 5 women are sexually harassed before the age of 15. These statistics are quite scary, as in there shouldn't be statistics for this sort of thing at all, but there are. And what we have to look at now is that if you want to join the campaign, there are things that you can get on Twitter. There are marches that are going to still happen. But I think the other thing is that you could have a look in your own employment or in your own families or in your friend circles and see what is being spoken about and how it's being spoken about, and then maybe challenge that. And I wouldn't say to somebody that challenge it if it's going to cause you any kind of difficulty or it might be risky or unsafe. So definitely don't go into your next family party and go, hey, men, I want to talk to you about this. Probably not the best way to approach it. But when somebody does say something that is quite obviously misogynistic or putting women down or think it's okay that women are hurt, beaten, or there's no equality for them and they think it's good and it's okay and that's the way it should be, it doesn't hurt to just say, well, I don't agree. That's all. But in workplace, there should be policies and procedures. And look, I'll tell you from experience that when you go to an employer and say, look, I think I should have got that job and I'd like to appeal, chances are you're not going to still get the job. But it does mean that your voice has been put on the record and you're not someone that's just going to take it, roll over as expected. So next time they might look at you a little bit differently, as in pay more attention. And the other thing is just be confident about what you are. Don't be ashamed of who you are or that you're a female or your age or the way you look or any of those sort of things. I mean, everyone's got a right to be free and safe. So that's no different to any of us. But also I would encourage people that if you want to do this and you've never done it before, reach out to someone who has, because it's really good to get a mentor. And I know Gurundaji, and I'm sure you and Gigi too, are good mentors for people. And it's just a matter of being, sometimes you remind yourself. I mean, I need it too. I sometimes, when we look at these situations, they can become very overwhelming. And you can start thinking, oh my God, why am I bothering? When this Parliament House stuff happened, a lot of people who work in DV just went, oh God, where are we going with this? How are we going to stop the average man when these guys who make the laws are doing it? But you can't let that stop you. No different to the suffragettes didn't let anything stop them getting us the vote. We've got the vote. Now we need to use it. And I would encourage anyone that if they do want to go into politics, just put yourself out there and just go and join up the right committees. There's around Australia, there's many different committees. There's the Australian Women's Electoral Lobby. There's the local Women's Government Association. Lots of organisations where you can join as a woman to get mentoring or to learn more about it before you step out. Maybe stepping out like maybe me and Gurundaji did, in the first place, without any experience or any mentorship, was probably why it came as such a shock. But there's many more mentors now, and I would encourage anyone to say, look, find out about it, join a group, support someone else to start with, find out what it's about, and just educate yourself.
Definitely. This is one of the reasons why we've got the core show, is to be able to be a voice for those who don't have one, to be able to talk about those taboo topics or inspirational stories. And that's what we enjoy doing, because not because we're Beshams or anything like that. It's because we want to be that voice for those who don't have one. It's really that simple. But coming back to my own experience, I find that just when dealing with men at work, sometimes they put you in this position where, I'm going to ask you, can you do this because you're a woman? And I wouldn't ask anyone else, but ask you. And when you're in the same line of position with them, whether it's senior or whether they're your colleagues, it's then your job to then say, actually, no, I wouldn't do this for you because I wouldn't ask you to do my job for me. So why are you asking me?
Yeah.
And when I remember putting them in that situation where I asked them, no, why I don't get you to do my job. Why are you asking me? They never asked me again. And it was maybe for them, it was like, oh, how dare you speak back to us? But why don't ask any other men here? No, it has to be the woman to see how weak she is. And then it's up to us to be able to not lash out, but it's up to us in a way to say it that you never be asked again. And that's what I found that worked for me.
Yeah, and different things work for different people. Like some people use humor. In the past, I've said, sure, and here's my invoice, and people go, what? You say, well, you want me to do something that's not my job, I'm going to charge for it. But you can use humor, you can use different ways, you can use avoidance. There's lots of different ways that you can deal with it without being too confrontational, because I think the difficulty is that already we have those tags and those labels that, women just whinge, they complain, they're not as good, and that's why they haven't gotten as much confidence. And as soon as you complain, then you're the whinger again, and it's put back onto the woman as saying, well, you're the problem. We're all okay with it. Why are you complaining? So there is a little bit of a, you have to put some thought into how you're going to approach something. And also, there's a great saying that say, choose the battles that you can. Like, you can't win all the battles, so choose your battles carefully as to which ones you can actually win. And then if you choose the right battles, you can win the war.
That's very right, Kitiji. And we know that Australia and other countries, there's a lot of multiculturalism these days, and we have women who cannot speak English as well. A lot of women in Australia as well, and they face additional barriers even to access their rights, to understand what sort of laws protect us against gender inequality. So, do you know any special awareness programs or any resources that's been published in translated languages that's helping them?
Not in gender inequality. Australia has what they call a national plan to prevent the violence against women, and within that is the gender inequality for pointers, which is gender stereotypes, call out, shaming, giving equality and parity in pay. So those principles are supposed to flow down in whatever we do in the sectors. How well they work is anyone's guess. But also we do see a lot of government-funded projects about women's empowerment. But my take on that is that a lot of women are actually quite empowered. They're just not very enabled. I mean, you might be able to go out and bake the best cake, but if you haven't got a kitchen and any ingredients, you can't do it. So it's not a question always for programs to do this for us. But in terms of for multicultural women with language problems, there's more and more things in language now. In domestic and family violence, there's so many resources that are available in multiple languages, and then on top of that, you've got videos that are available for women. But I don't think the problem is that they don't understand that they're going through domestic and family violence, as a lot of people think. I mean, I think when you're in a difficult situation and you've got an abusive partner or member of the family, you know it. It's what do you do about it? And if you're on a temporary visa, like the newer migrants are, we get more migrants now through temporary visas than we do permanent visas. So if you're dependent on that visa and you're dependent on his income and you're going to complain, then you're going to not just jeopardize his residency, but your own, possibly your children's, and possibly other members of the family if somebody's expecting you to bring a brother or somebody else over as well. So until we fix up some of these systemic issues, for those women who are in the multicultural space and in the language barrier space, we will need to do some work to fix up the systems first, so that they can be enabled to go out there and start to do what they want. But we also have to bear in mind that some of these women do not want to go out and live independently. They do want to live with a husband providing for them for everything. And although that, for you and I, that may be a little bit odd to say that if it's an abusive relationship, why would you bother? But they've never known anything else and they don't want to know anything else. And again, that's your right to believe in what you want to believe in and to live your life the way you choose.
I think you've rightly said that, and it's also like I did like my father who gave that advice about how women in our society, he didn't want to sugarcoat it or anything. He did just say, you've just got to work that bit harder with what's happening and the reality of it. So prepare yourself to get educated, basically, from a young age it was. And now having 2 daughters, I would do the same. I would suggest that if we can with our audience, when you've got young children, try and teach them from a very young age about equality. And that's just on a general level. Because once they've got it ingrained them in from young age, it's easier for them to process as they get older. And then when they get older, they can talk about what equality is all about. How does this work in the job field, But it's from the young that we start training them about what our experience has been and how it should be changed for the next generations coming. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to carry on being the same vicious cycle with racism as well. Political, anywhere you go, it's going to be in that sector. I mean, do you have any other suggestions, Kitu?
Look, you've touched on racism, and I think for most of us, especially in the UK, in fact, gender was second, your race was first. It didn't matter who you were, and I think maybe that was for the generation of my father who came to England, that maybe they appreciated the disadvantage a little bit more. And like your parents, my parents were very much about just get an education. The way out of this is to get an education. But we did find when we became teenagers and Britain was going through a recession that just having an education did not mean that you had a job, because jobs were limited and you were not at the top of it, at the top of the pecking order to get those jobs. So it's always been that struggle between whether it's because you're brown or whether it's because you're a woman. But, for us, three of us, both are just as real. Sometimes one is in play and one is not. But I would say that to whoever's like watching or listening now, is that things are changing and we have to grab this time as an opportunity to put our voice to it. And that's why I'm sitting here talking to you now on a Sunday evening. Normally I wouldn't be doing it. But I think it's important that we get our voices out there and we stop being the ones that are not heard. And I do not want other white people talking for me. I've had my experiences and my lived experience. Don't be telling me how I feel. I know how I feel. And that's the same as when I advocate for my clients, that, don't be telling her she's going through DV. She knows it. Okay. But in terms of gender equality, to finish up, I would say be aware of what's going on around you. Lots of things happen that are happening right under your nose, whether you're getting on a bus, going to the shops, or whatever you're doing, and you'll start to see just how imbalanced it is. But what those little bits that you can do is like, you can put your voice forward, you can behave differently, you can treat people differently. And look, we do it as well. Somebody in a shop, you know what? You don't go into a shop and look down on them because they're a shopkeeper. They're not a bank manager. These are the kind of ways that we can also contribute in our everyday lives without any programs, without any government funding, just by those sorts of changes.
Definitely. Where can people go for more info or help if they are struggling with gender inequality?
Look, we have a Equal Opportunities Commissioner in Australia. So if they've got a serious case, they can go there. If it's also to do with racial discrimination, we have a Race Discrimination Commissioner. We have a Human Rights Commission. A lot of these things are quite bureaucratic, and, you've got to be a little bit talented at writing your case across to get to them in the first place. And the remedies are sometimes that, yes, we acknowledge it happened to you. And that's another thing that you have to confront. Some people use a lawyer to go through these things because if they're looking for some compensation, if they really feel that something terrible has happened. But beyond that, most organisations have a governance structure where there's a policy where they can lodge a complaint and then have it heard reasonably. And that's really the struggle at the moment, is that some places where those policies are, they're not really working very well. And that's what we're looking at changing. But that would be your first step. But if you don't feel comfortable talking to somebody within your organisation, or whether it's, even if it's happening in the Gurdwara or if it's happening somewhere else, kids play group, these things happen everywhere. Talk to someone like one of the organisations like mine or Villages, and come and have a chat to us, and we're happy to put you in touch with somebody who's more of a specialist within the area that you're talking about.
No, that's great. I liked how you said earlier, choose your battles carefully. It's very true. It's a very powerful statements. Thank you so much for mentioning that again. I think we all need reminders from time to time as well. But we'd like to thank Kitu for sharing her wealth of knowledge and educating us all. I've learned so much myself. So thank you so much for your time today. Are there any last speeches or comments from Govinda?
No, thank you, Gitaji. I think I can definitely echo how much work you have been doing, and all for us, and how much efforts you're putting, and you're a role model for us. And thank you so much for your time today. Maybe if you have any last comments regarding this topic or anything related, please share it with us now.
I don't really have any last, because this is too big a subject really to just cover an hour. I would encourage anybody who thinks that they want to do more or how they can do it, whether it's on social media or outside, contact one of us, or just go on Twitter and go, I think it's #MarchForJustice. You'll find lots of organisations and groups, and just by adding your voice to them, many of them are doing letters at the moment to say sign your name to them. This will help. So that's a great place to start. If you want to just say that I didn't really know how much it was before, go there and have a look. Keep up to date.
No, that's really well said. Raise your voice. And thank you everyone who has tuned in today or later on. I will see you again soon. I think we're having a break for a couple of weeks because of Vaisakhi. If you have any comments or a specific topic that you would like covered, please send us an email to hello@thecoreshow.com. And if you'd like to see any of our previous shows, please visit our website, thecoreshow.com. Thank you, everybody.